Hello. So today I'm going to do a channel on chakras. I don't know much about chakras, but they are definitely something which has a lot of attention, has been part of the human culture for a very long time, from what I can tell, because it originates from Eastern culture. I'm assuming, this is just guessing, I haven't really researched it. Well, actually I didn't research it at all. But you know, this concept that there is some type of energy centers in our body that we can use to make ourselves more of what we want to be or something. So I'm just curious what they are. How can they be utilized? So what are the chakras? How can they be utilized? So it's pretty straightforward. Have my water. Okay. Let's see what we got. You are an energetic being, and you are real-time streaming into the body. You are continuously downloading yourself from an off-site location. You are not the mind, the body, the personality. These are just temporary assets. It's a conduit which allows you to have a physical experience. You are an energetic, and you do not have an inherent physicality. However, for the purpose of realizing the self in the physical experience, then it's necessary for you to have a vehicle which allows this possibility. And that is why during a lifetime, a incarnation, you have the temporary asset, which is the mind, the body, the personality. However, you are none of these. You are not the mind, the body, the personality, but you are the energetic, which is real-time streaming into the apparatus, into the conduit. And so as you download into the conduit, you, in a sense, channeling yourself so that you can be emanated as presence. Your energy is diffracted. It is split into the fields of the chakra, the 7 chakra points. So that you can function as a human being. And each of these 7 diffractions energize one of the 7 facets of the human being. This creates a stability in the human being. So it creates a broader foundation for the human experience to operate upon. And it also creates a nuance so there can be a more refined understanding of self. And when there is an imbalance in self-understanding, there is an occlusion, an opaqueness to self-understanding. It does not occlude all aspects of your energetic flow. So from an engineering perspective, by having this diffraction into the 7 chakral points, there is a distribution of load, and misunderstanding in one of the 7 foundational ways of being a human being will not necessarily have an impact or an occlusion on the other 6 facets. And this allows for a higher propensity for functionality. Also, it provides the opportunity for a more clarified self-investigation. When the devotee, to understanding the energetic dynamic between the body and the higher self download, it can be understood what each of the 7 chakra locations translate into the human experience. And if you find that you are struggling in a certain region of your life, and it can be identified to a chakral point, to one of these chakral centers, then that is the beginning of a roadmap into the introspection, self-discovery, and healing of self, such that the occlusion is removed, and with greater authenticity you can flow spontaneously into the moment and become increasingly the true essence of self, the higher self in the physical experience. So these occlusions are erroneous beliefs. It is a field of misconceptualization about self, which causes a rerouting of the flow of self to the mind. And then there is a distorted emanation of self. And this distorted emanation is also a distortion of the geometry of the desires of the higher self. The higher self has an agenda, and it has a mission. So, this is an agenda. And when the higher self real-time download is allowed to stream without any adulteration, without any diversion to the mind, and so it is just spontaneous emanation of presence, then the human being becomes very aligned with their higher self energetic, and there becomes a very close relationship between behavior and actions of the human being with their energetic intent. And this alignment is when you will see humans being very on purpose, very effective, and having a large impact on their own lives and the lives of others. Not necessarily through a physical effect, but energetically. Because when there is this alignment between the energetic non-physical, the desires and intent of the higher self, and the physicalization, the temporary vehicle, then the flow of the higher self into the moment as presence is very robust and is oracally very complete, without deficit, without opaqueness, without occlusion. And this type of human being becomes a beacon, becomes a bright pulsation of the one, of the higher self in the physical experience. And so they broadcast a strong energy field which is influential in affecting all of the physical realm. It will affect themselves intensely, and it will affect those around them, and it will spill over into the humanity being, into the earth being, into the solar system being, and so on. So this is the intended state of every human being, to be in this alignment between the energetic intent and desires of the higher self and the expression in the physical experience. So there is a literal instantaneous emanation, downloading, releasing of the flow into the moment, with no rerouting to the mind, with no distortion. So with the chakras, understanding what the chakras are and how they relate to the different aspects of your life is a way that you can investigate what it is that you are believing about self, which is erroneous, and creating this disruption or this distortion in the physical field. So, for example, if you have a physical experience which is distorted in certain ways, those distortions can be mapped or attributed to a occlusion in the energetic flow from one of the chakral points, or perhaps more than one of the chakral points. And when you understand what the correlation between this mapping is, then you can begin to have an insight into what belief structures you are holding, which are creating this occlusion, this opaqueness. And you can make the conscious decision to clear away the erroneous belief, to release the erroneous belief, to understand that these beliefs you hold are not you, but are instead a mistruth of the mind. And you can relinquish, release, which will make the lens or the chakral point more translucent in nature. And so this diffraction of the energy of self, which is download streaming from this aspect, can flow freely. And this will create greater balance in your life, because now the chakral point, which was occluded, is more open. And so this aspect of the self, this diffracted energetic part of the self, which is download streaming, can be flowing into the moment as emanation, emanating to the moment purely. And so it removes the distortion on the geometry, and your life will shift towards being more reflective of the geometry of the higher self, being more reflective in outcome of the desires, mission, agenda of the higher self. Becoming masterful of self. It is not necessary that you become a student of the chakral points. It is a roadmap. It is something which is available to be utilized. However, it is not essential on your path to mastery that you become conversant with the chakra points and their representations and how to utilize them. However, there is a beneficial effect of understanding what these chakra points are. So, if you have an interest, study what the chakral energy centers represent, and then, in a comparative way, look at your life and see if you can identify regions of your life which correlate to these chakral centers that you are feeling there is an imbalance. Perhaps you are struggling with material abundance. Then, through understanding the chakral centers, you can begin to have an understanding that there is this particular aspect of self, this particular aspect of the energetic flow of the higher self when it's diffracted and broadcast through self, through these chakra points, that there is an occlusion, that there is a distortion field. And that distortion field is erroneous belief, which interrupts the flow of self, the spontaneous emanation, and reroutes it to the mind for distortion. So, for you, Murray, let us look at one of the chakral occlusions that you have most prominent in your life. Looking across your life, you have abundance in many ways. You have an abundance of freedom, health, wisdom, love, and so on. However, in the material sense, in the possession of material goods, in living a life standard which is correlating more closely to what you would desire to live, this is something that you are not achieving. It is a deficit. And this can be mapped to your base chakra. So, the base chakra represents the capacity to support the self, to have a belief that you can create in your life a material abundance, that you have the capacity, the wherewithal to make this occur. You have doubts about whether this can be achieved. You have an erroneous beliefs that perhaps you don't have what it takes, or perhaps it can't be achieved, or perhaps it is something that you don't deserve. And this layer of erroneous belief is occluding the flow of energetic through this basal chakra, which is related to the geometry of the material abundance you wish to experience. And so it's creating a distortion. And the distortion in the geometry, which is flowing from the higher self and the download real-time streaming, is having the effect of creating an abundance of lack. because there is nothing but abundance. You are an infinite being, and so by nature you are abundant. And therefore in your life that you experience, there will be nothing but abundance. Abundance of the lack of abundance is what you experience in terms of your material wealth, your material possessions, your access to material resources. So, if you wish to utilize this understanding, then turn your focus into the basal chakra, and using the other 6 energy centers, focus a cleansing beam. Use the other 6 energy centers as a type of aggregated laser and direct the energetic flow from those through the basal chakra to cleanse it, to blast it out. And when you are doing this, to release the erroneous belief, to allow it to be surrendered. Understanding that the higher self does not have this battle with erroneous belief. The higher self understands fully what it is that you are holding, which is creating the occlusion. So it isn't even essential that you have a clear understanding of exactly what those beliefs are or what their origins were, although this is useful to understand. But it's not essential, because the higher self understands that this is an occlusion. The higher self understands and recognizes that this belief nexus isn't itself. It isn't the higher self. It sees it as foreign, as something which isn't representative or even part of what it is. It's a foreign body. It is a mistruth. It is a darkness or a type of energetic tumor which has no place but is there because it is a misconceptualization of self, and it is serving a function which is unknown to the consciousness of the mind. So be prepared to release it. Be prepared to diminish the mind, to diminish the personality, because this is part of the personality structure, which isn't necessary. It isn't required. Yet it is clung on to because the personality doesn't want to be diminished. The ego doesn't want to release aspects of itself because it will be a type of death and it will become less. And this is a fear of the ego, because the ego believes that it is the being, that the mind is the being, because it is the only one that is thinking, that is having an internal voice. But of course, the mind is just an artificial intelligence. It's the organic AI to the apparatus. And so it is a tool. It is intended as a servant. And its role is to facilitate the desires of the higher self and not to elevate itself in reverence to the point where it is the one that is making the decisions about the presentation of self, of the emanation which is being given to the moment as the presence. So there must be a willingness to diminish the mind, to diminish the ego, the personality, such that it is no longer acting as an occlusion, as a darkness, as a tumor, which is preventing the spontaneous flow of self into the moment as presence, such that the geometry of the higher self can be emanated in a very clarified way, without distortion. So, utilize the other chakral centers. Use them as energy centers, as a type of laser, a type of cleansing mechanism, and focus the energy passing through those into the chakral point which is occluded, and use them in this way to blast out the blockages to that chakra point. And from the higher self perspective, have a desire to become less egoic, to become less of mind, to be diminished in these aspects of self which are not true, which are falsities of the mechanism of the mind. And what shall be revealed when this is blasted away, when this occlusion is separated and dissolved from the body, will be more of the true self, will be a greater authenticity and a greater capacity to broadcast the geometry of the higher self without distortion, such that the life you live begins to be more reflective of the agenda of the higher self, of the intent, the mission of the higher self, the desires of the higher self. We shall leave it here. There is not much more that we have to say on this topic. We don't have a strong resonance with this topic, and so there is not much more for us to add. And we hope this is useful and something that you can try and experiment with. We thank you for the question. We love you, and we'll speak to you again soon.